Okay, welcome leaders to another edition of Inspiring Leadership, where our mission is to activate and inspire you listeners on your lifelong journey to becoming better leaders for your organization, for your team, and for yourselves. I'm your host, jburt, Executive Leadership Coach. Today I have with me an exciting guest, Seth Maxwell. Seth is the founder and CEO of the Thirst Project and Legacy Youth Leadership. Seth leads a full and busy life, and that's the way he likes it. Over his career, he has worn many hats. He's been a son, a friend, an entrepreneur, activist, producer, actor, and speaker. He's founded the Thirst Project and currently serves as the founder and CEO of Legacy Youth Leadership, two creative and diverse nonprofit organizations leading the world's work to end the global water crisis, develop young people's leadership skills, respectively. Seth is a storyteller at heart and has spoken internationally at over 300 schools, countless churches, and numerous conferences, including keynote speeches for the TEDx Hollywood Youth Conference, Masters of Science Communications commencement ceremony at Northwestern University, Envision's Global Youth Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C., and many other events. Seth challenges people to fulfill their true purpose in life and become an engaged and socially conscious human being. He is passionate about providing relief for those impacted by the clean water crisis, HIV/AIDS pandemic, feeding the hungry, and providing support for the millions of orphans and widows in our world today. With his inspiring and humorous style, Seth challenges our thinking and touches your heart. Welcome, Seth, and thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always like the weirdest thing ever when someone's like, let me just tell all about you.
It is a little bit weird to hear that sometimes, isn't it? You start thinking about all the things you've done and you go, wow, full life. So like you said, you're really, really busy, and I appreciate that. I want to thank you for taking the time with our listeners today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Seth, let's start with the Thirst Project. Tell us a little bit about what is the Thirst Project? What was your inspiration, and what were your aspirations for that initial organization?
So I first learned about the global water crisis when I was 19. That is to say that, about 14 years ago, I learned that at that point in time, there were over 1 billion people in the world who just didn't have access to basic, safe, clean drinking water. And that's not, just a big number. In a really practical way, what it meant was that in developing communities all over the world, women and children would walk really long distances from their homes to really whatever standing water sources were available. So most commonly rivers, ponds, swamps, but open, unprotected sources that were shared with animals who would drink and defecate in the same water sources that people drank from, which consequently meant that people would contract really easily preventable waterborne diseases. So, diarrheal diseases or dysentery, accounts for more child deaths than HIV and malaria combined. And so I sort of was struck just by how massive in scale the issue was, but also how it really did impact almost every other aspect of life. If you're passionate about education, you can't build schools or outfit them with teachers if all of the kids in a particular community are out walking, sometimes 6 or 7 hours a day just to get water. So if you care about education, care about water. If you care about hunger, you can't develop agricultural initiatives to combat food insecurity without water. So if you care about hunger, you care about water. And so I just started telling that story to anybody who would listen when I was 19. And my friends and I started raising awareness of this issue at our school, around town here in Los Angeles. Eventually, a few other schools with friends that we had there asked us if they could start similar groups. And so they did. And in a few months, we had about 3 schools doing fundraising initiatives, and they raised over $12,000. And that was kind of the moment when we realized that, man, if that's what 3 schools could do, what if there were 100 schools? What if there were 1,000 schools? And we realized nobody was really activating people our age at that point around this issue. So we created the Thirst Project, and fast forward, 14 years, Thirst Project is the largest youth water organization in the world. There are lots of great water and sanitation and hygiene organizations working to address those issues, but really nobody was really exclusively or at scale the way we were educating and activating young people around this issue. So, kind of pre-COVID in 2019, we had a school tour where we literally sent speakers to go speak at assemblies at high schools and colleges to educate students about this issue and challenge them to take action. And that one school year, we spoke to about 150,000 students in a 9-month period, which is pretty representative of, the years prior. We would get to the place where in any given year, we would work with a couple 100,000 students at high school and college campuses who would do crazy things like walks, dances, video game tournaments, basketball tournaments, all to raise awareness of the issue and then money to build real water projects in communities that need it the most. We committed to give 100% of all the money that students and public donors raise directly to building projects. So we have a pretty incredible group of donors and corporate sponsors led by our board who covered all the operating expenses. But since we started, Thirst Project brought about 500,000 people in 13 countries safe, clean water for the rest of their lives. And, kind of more broadly, as a global community, we've seen the number of people without safe water go from 1.1 billion to about 650, 660 million. So while the global population has risen, the number of people in the world without safe water has been cut, by a third or more. And so we believe we will see the end of this issue, not just in our lifetimes, maybe in the next 15, 20 years. So it's been a crazy journey, but that's sort of the Thirst Project story.
Wow. That's an incredibly ambitious challenge you took on when you were 19, and have a lot of respect for what you did, and some of the results that you've driven have been impressive as well. So one of the things our leaders out there would probably like to hear about is what were some of the challenges that you faced when you first started getting this initiative going, your passion, and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, the list is, there's too many challenges to sort of single out just one or two, but some of the bigger ones, I guess, and initially early on when we first started, we were 19, right? Not only were we 19, but I have decided a long time ago, A, not to pretend that I know things I don't know, and B, to be pretty unapologetic about like who I am in the process. And so all that said, like, I don't have a degree in nonprofit management. I don't have an MBA. My degree is in theater, right? Like, my background is, I grew up storytelling and in the entertainment space. And so on paper, I really have no business doing the work that we did at Thirst Project, right? But what was amazing was I was always very, I guess if I ever did anything well, the one thing I did well was knowing all of the many things I knew nothing about and being really honest about it, and then finding people who were incredible at those things and doing the one thing I knew how to do, which was tell a compelling story and convince them to come around the table and use their skills to build what we built. So much credit, both in the past and present, to what Thirst Project was, is, will be, is absolutely due to, that early board who came around the table and really were the ones who defined and architected our operation strategy and our finance strategy and our marketing plans. So much credit is due to the people who sit on our water project technical board, who are civil engineers and hydrogeologists who, oversee how and where we build projects and how we work with communities in the field. And so, I think the initial challenge early on, though, being a 19-year-old, right, like being a young person, really not credentialed in the way that the world would typically tell you need to be to start a social venture, certainly a like pretty technical community development focused venture in the water and sanitation space. The biggest challenge early on was just like, with no proof of concept, convincing people that we were capable of and going to do the thing that we wanted to do, and that they should support us, whether that meant giving us their money, giving us their time, lending their expertise or their name or their voice, right? And as far as like, how do you overcome that? I think it's interesting because like, it's easy to like sit through the intro you just gave and be like, oh yeah, like we've raised tens of millions of dollars and mobilized like hundreds of thousands of students every year, millions of students now, right? And or worked with these really amazing big brands or celebrities and be like, oh wow, like they've just always had it figured out. But the reality is, like, the day before something's looked at and is like, oh wow, that was like a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. Like, we have no business historically doing what we've done, and yet like if I sat down and said, hey, a bunch of 19-year-olds are going to start a international development NGO that's going to help, bring 500,000 people clean water and mobilize millions of students to like really raise the profile of this issue. And by the way, they have no business experience, no water experience. So you'd be like, yeah, cool. That sounds good luck with that. So I think that early challenge was like, we got a lot of no's, right? Like we got, and I still today get so many no's. Like I said, I think it's easy to look at the highlight reel and be like, oh man, they just have so many supporters and so many sponsors and celebrity supporters and schools, and that's just so great for them. And it's like, yeah, it took 14 years to get to that space. And I think the thing that we did that overcame all of the many no's, because there were way more no's than there were yeses, and still today like more no's than there are yeses, right? It was just, we were kind of relentless. And I think we always did a good job of striking the balance between not being annoying, but also being persistent, right? But it was just never taking all of the many no's personally, and then moving on to the next and finding the next person. And so I was like, okay, cool, maybe this person will be the right donor, maybe this person will be the right sponsor, maybe this person will let us come speak at their school. And then it got easier over time, right? Like once, I think year one, we spoke at like 10 schools, right? And the next year there were 40 schools. And the next year there were like over 100 schools. But it, really was, again, a huge credit is due to those early adopters who, when they really had no reason to, believed in and invested in and supported, what we wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing story, Seth. I really appreciate it, because I think you articulated and you embody and practice many good leadership characteristics. I mean, that first one, of course, is the vulnerability. Right at 19, you were willing to say, "Hey, listen, I don't know everything yet," which is one of the key things we talk about with leadership.
I don't know most things. I know like two things. Like, I literally, what I tell our staff a lot, I'm like, look,
Yeah,
I know like three things. So, but that means if I tell you I know something, you should pay attention, because it is so rare.
right. But so many leaders we talk about today is that you get the most out of your team if you kind of let them drive. So the vulnerability is key. And then you mentioned the 3 Ps, right? The pride in what you're doing, passion for what you're doing, and that persistence in terms of just taking all those no's. I thought that was, those are 3 key elements to any successful leader out there. And then the final one is the storytelling. Your ability to storytell and draw upon maybe your creative side, but just being able to tell a story and just telling it passionately, telling it over and over again. Those are just some really, really key elements. So a couple of years ago, you created a second organization called Legacy Youth Leadership. Now, tell us a little bit about how this organization evolved from the Thirst Project.
Yeah. So I already told you, Thirst Project, which still exists, is still around, has its own team, its own board, is still hyper focused on ending the water crisis. None of that has changed. But our work, particularly with students and young people at Thirst Project, always really just had one goal, which was, how do we raise as much money from these students as fast as possible so that we can build as many water projects and bring as many people clean water as fast as possible, which is inherently noble, right? But as time went on, we hit, a decade of doing that work, and I would get cards or letters from students who I literally never met before. Some of which said, I still have, like, I'll never forget a card that said, like, thank you so much for starting Thirst Project. If it wasn't for Thirst Project, I don't know what the highlight of my senior year would have been, which is amazing. And it just got me thinking, and I one day locked our like education programs team in an office, and I was like, hey, apart from just raising money from the students, like what is the value that we provide to them, right? It's easy to point to the impact that we or they made on the water crisis. It's easy to measure it, right? How many people do we bring safe water to? How many, what was the reduction of waterborne disease rates over time, or reduction of waterborne mortality? But I was like, what's the impact we made in the lives of these students? And, we had a lot of sexy, catchphrases, oh, well, we're building a socially conscious generation of young people and we're doing all these things. And I was like, what does that mean? How do we measure it? And so we spent a couple years, just really wrestling with how do we define the impact on the lives of these students? How do we measure it? And so we reached out actually to a friend of mine who leads a group of social scientists at USC here, and asked them to study 2 years worth of students who went through our programs at Thirst Project and point to the actual measurable change in the lives of those students. And the results of the report they produced were pretty fascinating. I mean, they said, hey, we can actually tie specific aspects of working with you guys to these 14 hard and soft skills that it produces in these students and in these ways. And they were things like, yes, of course, obviously the skill of raising money, right? But also things like communication and public speaking, organization and strategic planning, goal setting, also soft skills like social emotional development, things that students could use in their academic careers, their professional careers eventually, and of interest to me as a social entrepreneur, really skills that they could use to make an impact on any issue or cause they cared about. And all these things were happening by accident. That's not what we existed to do. And we said, man, wouldn't it be crazy if we were to actually be intentional about designing programs to achieve these outcomes? How much more could we serve and benefit students? And we realized there were these kind of two things happening, right? These two missions. And so to give each one of them the attention and the resources they deserve, we created Legacy. And so, Legacy Youth Leadership, its mission is not, how do we raise money from students, or how do we help students raise money for a cause, although that's, one of the ways they can apply their skills. But the mission is, because fundraising is actually not a focus, we are prioritizing access to these free education programs to predominantly lower income communities and communities of color, where students have historically not had as much access to these kinds of development opportunities, and helping students become, better public speakers, communicators, yes, fundraisers, which they can use, in their business lives or, in their philanthropic initiatives, so they can make an impact in the world. So that's really what led to the creation of it.
Wow, and that's a really strong mission, Seth, and I really appreciate that. One of the reasons why, in complete openness here, I participate on an advisory board for Legacy Youth Leadership for Seth, and so really proud of that work that we're doing there. So we talked a little bit about that mission, that strong mission and purpose. And then you mentioned the skills. So what, with this kind of new, now that you distilled this with the study from USC, what are the skills, the leadership skills that you're specifically focused on for Legacy Youth Leadership?
Yeah, well, let's just actually like peel the curtain back even more for a second, right? So it sounds really nice to be like, oh yeah, you're building young leaders and you're providing these free education programs in low income communities, but what does it even mean when I say program? And so initially, we built these two programs, our leadership program and our speaking program. And when I say program, each one of them are about 6 to 8 weeks long, depending on which one you take. They are running on a rolling basis all year long throughout the school year. So August to May, June-ish, give or take. And they're cohort based. So, when you take one of these programs, you will go through this experience with a cohort of 30 to 40 other students who are going through it, for similar reasons as you, right? And if you want to imagine what the program looks like, imagine if you're familiar with Masterclass, they are sort of like Masterclass for helping young people change the world, except that Masterclass is really just video lessons, video content. So these programs that we've built are half pre-record video content and activities and assignments that are housed in a platform, but they're also half live sessions that are facilitated by educators and team members of ours who take these cohorts of students through these 6, 7, 8 week journeys. And then on the other side of these programs, students take action and apply the skills that they've learned, ideally by making impact on a cause, which could be leading a fundraiser or an awareness campaign, could be leading like I said, an awareness initiative, or starting a club, for those who kind of want to go a little bit deeper and like not just do a one-time fundraiser or event or awareness campaign, but who really want to figure out, how do I almost lead a mini organization? How do I recruit members? How do I identify the skills that those members have and match them to roles on the team? How do I lead not boring meetings? How do I set goals for, not just recruitment and, awareness, but also fundraisers or events, and that kind of stuff, right? So it's interesting because if you think about kind of the life cycle of a student in those programs, we have an outreach initiative where we'll go speak at schools, make them aware of these programs, bring students into them. Students can take those 6 to 8 week journeys throughout those programs. And on the other side of them, we can actually pair students who've completed those programs with mentors. So typically adult working professionals who will meet with those students on a monthly basis and help them, really check in and figure out how to reach the goals that they've set for their cause or their initiative that they care about, to apply the skills. But the skills are fairly similar, right? We try to chop and distill down what we sort of prioritize as the most important, because 14 is a lot of skills, and it's also like, as you set out the metrics to evaluate the success of an organization, it's like, okay, 14 is a lot. Like, what do we really care about? But it is communication and public speaking. It is fundraising. It is organization and strategic planning and goal setting. It is social emotional development. How does a student, improve some of those soft skills that are, how do they relate to a team and build a team? And so it's a lot of that.
Seth, I know you and I've talked about the benefits that having a program like this provides with the youth in the community. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that because I think your mission includes recognizing that young people today need something like this, and I just really like to have you touch on that in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the benefits.
Yeah, it's interesting, because obviously our work with students started through the lens of a very specific cause, right? The water crisis. And so a few things have happened as we've created this new organization. One is we're trying to listen much more than we talk when it comes to how to craft the experience and way that we serve students. And one of the things we know for sure, we surveyed a couple thousand students and just asked them, hey, apart from, say, the water crisis, what are some other causes or initiatives that you care about that you'd like for us to provide you with tools that you can take action around and apply the skills you're learning? And it's been super fascinating. I mean, like, top of the list by far, and by about a 33 percentage point differential between it and the next cause, was climate change. Students just overwhelmingly say like that is the thing they care about the most, they're the most concerned about, followed by things like gender equality, racial justice and equity, homelessness, animal rights, LGBTQ issues, and more. But also amongst all of that, what is interesting is probably almost as highly prioritized as climate change, but that directly impacts almost all the students, if not every student we work with, is also mental health issues. And it's no secret, right? Young people are not alone in the reality of the fact that the last 2 years particularly have, I don't know that they've necessarily created a completely new mental health issue, but they have amplified maybe some of the things that were already growing and undealt with in our and probably every country, right? And so for us, when we think about just the reality of the environment and the world that our students are a part of, we know that suicide is still the second leading cause of death for young Americans ages 10 to 23. Which is just mind-boggling, right? Like, we know that there are 10 million young people between the ages of 12 and 20 who will consume and abuse alcohol, 90% of which is consumed through binge drinking. And we know that about 6.3 million young Americans between the ages of 3 and 17 already at 3, 4, 5 suffer from anxiety or depression. And then when we think about just the way that we've prioritized availability of our program in lower income communities. We know that like children from low income families are 3 times less likely to have access to participate in after school extracurricular programs or these kinds of leadership development programs.
Mhm.
And so it's incredible, right? Like we also know on the flip side, or in the positive way, that like young people who volunteer at least say 10 hours per month or so, give or take, are significantly less likely to feel depressed than those who do not.
Mhm.
We know that 90% of young people who participate in extracurricular programs are dramatically less likely to contemplate suicide than their peers who don't at all.
Right.
And so it's pretty incredible, the correlation in those worlds. And so for us, we're just like, man, that's not even necessarily the reason we set out to do the work that we do, but the fact that these programs do serve as key programmatic intervention for a lot of things that our students are also themselves already struggling with is really
Yeah.
important.
That's terrific, Seth. I mean, just an incredible program and such a great cause with so many benefits for youth. So, Seth, I'm a leadership coach, right? So I help leaders, develop their skills and become more successful leaders in their workplace and life. So, if you were to say what type of leadership advice would you give the listeners today in terms of what they need to be, developing in terms of their skills?
Yeah, well, I think, I sit in a unique space. I am not myself a young person, and that may seem laughable to you, but like literally, I was at an event last night that a friend of mine who leads a Gen Z marketing and consulting agency had, and it was the opening of their LA office. And when I tell you that the oldest person after me was 25, so about a solid decade younger than me, and all the people who were there who were, influencers and creators and also, leading their own brands and stuff, were, 22, 23, 25, and a lot of 19, 20-year-olds too. I was like, my God, I am no longer young. But all that to say, I do sit in an interesting intersection where we work with tens of thousands of young people, high school students, college students in our programs. And as I look at the landscape of the working world, and if you are in a person who's in a position of leadership, whether you are leading your own venture business, or you're leading something in the social good space or otherwise, it is interesting to look at the emerging generation. And I would say, like, we need to do a lot more listening than we do talking.
Mhm.
I think like there are tons and tons of like people my age and older who I will see at like conferences or panels talking about like, oh, well, this is what Gen Z is like, or this is what Gen Z wants, this is who Gen Z is. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not even a member of that group. And by the way, nobody else on your panel is. So like, how do you know? Like maybe you should like invite them to have a seat at the table. And so I would say as a leader, one of the most valuable things you can do if you are going to engage with anybody in your workforce or anybody in your volunteer team or anybody who you're leading that happens to be, if you're a boomer, a millennial, if you're a millennial, Gen Z, like you should probably like, ask them some questions, ask them about like what's going on in their world, what do they actually want, what are their priorities. I think like there's a lot of people, like I think I saw an article the other day that said like, oh, like one of the number one things like young people want in the workplace is kombucha. And I was like, I'm pretty sure they want like a livable wage. Like I don't know, like I think like I don't know if you follow Dan Price, but he's a CEO who like posted about that, and I was like, yeah, like I don't know, I think there's just a lot of interesting conversation about people who we find ourselves increasingly leading that don't actually involve those people in the conversation. So
Yeah,
regardless, I would say listen more than you talk for sure.
yeah, so important. I think that inclusivity piece is so important in terms of, like I said, there are many people, many leaders in organizations that are failing to kind of connect and get the value out of having Gen Zs and other young cohorts in their group, and really actually engage in that discussion. So thank you for that. So Seth, you are a leader and you're CEO. So tell us a little bit about the challenges that you're facing today, and what type of leadership skills are you trying to further develop for yourself?
Yeah. Oh man. I'm facing the same challenges that every leader is facing today, right? The reality is anybody leading today, right? At the time of this recording, it's fall of 2022. Like we are coming out of a global pandemic, a 2-year like
Mhm.
world altering global pandemic. And yet COVID cases are spiking. Now there's the, the potential threat of recession. Are we already in one? Are we about to be in one? Who knows? Monkeypox, like what is the reality of that going to look like? And we're just in like such a, increasingly it feels like unsettled, uncertain, very like uncharted world. And I think there's like both positives and negatives in that, right? Like I think like the positive is when you are in a completely new territory, which we are, like there's not a single leader alive. I don't care how old they are. I don't care how seasoned they are. I don't care how big they lead billions, multi-billion dollar companies. Like no one alive has led through this moment, like out of a 2-year world altering global climate, pandemic.
Right.
So the beauty of that is on the positive, hopefully encouraging side, like we get to build it. We get to decide like what the rules are, how you engage in this kind of world. On the flip side, like it's my biggest challenges are the same as everybody else's, right? Like our donors, some of our biggest sponsors are experiencing the same challenges with inflation, the same challenges with supply chain issues, increased wages, with perhaps not increased revenue. And so for us, like, in the midst of a crisis or even coming out of crisis, like cash is definitely king. And, for us, like we're painfully transparent at both organizations. I'm like, like fundraising is really hard right now, like harder than it's ever been. I'm super proud of how we navigated the last couple of years. Like we haven't laid anybody off. We cut, any non-essential things, figured out like what to do to survive and then stabilize and figure out a trajectory forward. But, some of our biggest challenges right now are like, man, like how do we meet new supporters, new donors in a way that tells them the story of the work that we're doing in a way that inspires and mobilizes them to give, whether that is $5 or $500,000. But I mean, it is always a challenge with fundraising. And so for us, I mean, it really is, I think the response to that, of the like, how have you solved it? Or I don't know that we've solved it, but how are we dealing with it is, I really, like, I've been telling our team, I'm like, very little in our world, and when I say our world, I mean our organizations, is sacred. Our mission is sacred. How we want to impact students is sacred. Our commitment to developing these specific skills and reaching particularly low income students, those things are sacred. But how we do that and how we engage funders around that and how we tell the story of that, the how is like very not sacred. So I'm like, if something's not working, kill it. Question everything and be willing to change anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, Seth, thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. Give you an opportunity here. I mean, if our listeners are interested in getting involved, getting a hold of you, tell us how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, obviously, I am biased, right? I work for this organization and I work with and for young people, but I think all you have to do is like scroll through any social media platform or flip through the news if you still watch the news on television for 2 minutes to see like there's never been a time where we need to invest in young people more than now. And I think that where it may feel as though there is insurmountable division or insurmountable inequality or injustice, that there are huge issues that our world is facing. I get the privilege of, or maybe the advantage of, seeing up close so much of what young people are doing that is really great and good and transformative, right? And so I would say, man, we need all the help we can get. We need what we very lovingly, and I include myself in this category, call old people. So we need all of the wisdom and advice and money and platforms and amplification and audience and all that from people. So if you're interested, if you've heard any of this and you're like, man, I want to connect with these badass young leaders and support them, like, give us a ring. LegacyYouthLeadership.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Seth. And I love what you're doing. It's such a great cause, such a great set of activities for our young leaders, as well as the Thirst Project. So I want to thank you for joining us today on Inspiring Leadership and telling your story. Look forward to having you back as a guest next time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you to all of our listeners. I'm going to go ahead and put Seth's contact information as well as my contact information in the notes for this session. So when you see that out on YouTube, you'll be able to get a hold of both Seth and or myself. But please take action today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.